grant writer for the city of Salt Lake, for the city of Ogden, and then I also not only wrote grants, but I also oversaw grants when I was in Connecticut for institutions of government. So this is my world. I absolutely find grant writing fascinating and interesting. And today, as I said, I'm going to cover budgets and submissions as well as resources, where to find additional funding opportunities that you might be most interested in. The first, as you know, for those of you who participated, the very first session that we had was on the problem statement, as well as your capacity as an organization to address the issues in your community. The second workshop that we held was developing your actual work plan and how to measure success, primarily using a logic model. Today, we're going to talk about your budgeting, as well as budget systems or financial systems. Also about leveraging funding from other funding agencies, whether public or private, and then giving you information today on where to find resources as you move forward, or your sustainability. So I hope this information today and the previous two events were helpful to you, and you can always send me an email or contact us in any way you feel fit, and we will do our best to answer the questions between now and next week. But again, next week there is an open, what we're calling an open classroom. Right now it's tentatively planned for 2 hours, and I will be on my computer, and you will be able to communicate with me on, ask me any kind of questions related to grants or funding comparative to what we've already gone over. As Darryl had said, there is, not Darryl, Robert has said, there is an attachment called supplementary materials. That is some of the information I will go over next week. And we will also have the ability to go through an actual guide for grant writing for a federal grant. Anyway, so with that in mind, I want you to think about the following, okay? As a grant writer, how are you involved in the financial aspects of your agency? We don't have the ability to actually communicate through a poll question, but this is the question that I have for you, and I want you to think about this as we move into this section of the training. Okay, so these are all questions to keep on the back burner as you develop the program or project budget for your grant application. It's important to know how much the program you're working on is reflected in your organization or agency's budget. If the program is small, it may only make up, say, 5% of your agency's overall budget. The loss of funding then would not cause your agency to close down. But if a particular program reflects 80% of your organization's budget, that is a completely different scenario. This is a critically important idea and information that you need as a grant writer to determine a number of things. One of those things is how much time that you should spend on a particular application, right? So if your funding that for a particular program only makes up a small percentage or only one small program that you operate, if something were to go amiss and you weren't able to secure funding to keep it going, it doesn't place your agency in jeopardy. Whereas if it is the only thing you're operating, say it is a food bank, and then your primary funder makes up 80% of the funding that you get to operate your food bank, without that funding, you may wind up having to close or completely revamp your program. So it's important for you to understand all of the programs of your agency and how much one particular program counts towards the overall income stream of your agency's budget. If you're if your charitable nonprofit receives money from the federal government, okay, excuse me, sorry. Okay, here we go. If your agency receives money from the federal government, right, in a single year, the organization is most likely required to have an independent financial audit, or referred to as a single audit. Various state and local laws may also require an independent financial audit for charitable nonprofits that receive funds from state and local governments. You need to understand your state law requirements. Failing to follow regulations can result in a significant adverse consequence for your agency or organization. The information that I'm going to present only touches on basic information. So, how much will your project cost? Who will contribute? What requirements and restrictions? What happens if you don't get the funds? These are all the kinds of information that you need in order to ensure that your agency has the information that it needs in order to complete all required internal documentation. Okay. It must be clear as to what you will be using the specific funding for from a particular funder. If the funding is to support a large program with multiple funders, calculate the cost per client or service. Offer that information in the funding application as what will be done with the resources being requested from an agency or foundation. For every dollar, what percentage of that dollar goes to the services in comparison to the administrative costs? How many people are served with that dollar? How many dollars are needed to provide a specific service to an individual? Each time a new funding source is sought and then awarded to your agency, there could be a reporting requirement of, or there will be a reporting requirement of some kind. Today, the vast number of programs, especially ones of significance.
Sorry, Pauline.
Say that. Yeah.
Stop really quick. I think someone has taken over the screen sharing.
Okay.
And let me just, I believe Mary, it might be you. I see your screen on mine if you'd like to stop sharing your screen.
Are we all right now?
I'm not sure. Sorry, can people just kind of say what screen they see in the meeting chat?
Yeah, we see someone's email, Mary's
Yeah.
screen.
MaryB2@gmail.
Pauline, do you have the option to request control on your toggle bar?
I do not. I can close the presentation and get it back. Do you want to take it over and advance the slides for me?
Let me see if I can do something really quick.
Let's send Mary an email as well.
Okay, Pauline, I think you'll need to start sharing your screen again, Pauline.
Okay. Let's see. I'll have to end in order to do that. Is that all right?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Give me a minute, please. All right. Hello, everyone. Let's see how we can do this again. We worked on this yesterday, but we didn't really realize that this would be something that we would face. Let's see.
Robert, Mary looks like she was looking at the new document you sent over to us. Maybe we could just send an email back to her telling her that as well.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you see my screen now?
Not yet, Pauline.
Okay, let's see.
There we go.
'Cause
Yep,
I'm-
you can see it.
Okay, you can sit now? All right,
Well, we could before.
okay, let's see.
So just the same thing as yesterday, open the share tray and then. Yep,
Tell me
so
when you can see it. Can you see it now? Because I
I
have done.
It just takes a second to load.
Yeah, I think it's loading. Yep. So Pauline, that's gonna be your, that's the presenter.
Okay, all right. I don't know why it would come up as that, because my screen's. Okay, let's see how we can do this. I apologize, everyone. We'll get this to work. No, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. One more second. Does that work?
I think it's loading. Yep, there we go. We're
Okay.
back.
All right.
Thank
I'm
you,
going
Pauline.
to back. No worries. I'm going to backtrack just a few minutes because there was something on a previous slide that I wanted to mention to you. So we're going to go back to slide 9. Where am I? 7, 8, 9. All right. Okay. I want you to realize that in December of 2014, the Office of Management and Budget issued what is called the Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements. Okay? And what that did, it combined what had previously been contained in 8 separate OMB circulars related to grants and set it into a single set of rules. And that called now the Uniform Guidance. Prior to the issuance of the Uniform Guidance, OMB Circular A-133 governed the audit requirements under the Single Audit Act. You don't have to know the technical aspects of this, but it is something I want you to be aware of. So Subpart F of the Uniform Guidance now replaces Circular A-133 with a single audit compliance supplement, and that can be found in Appendix 9 of the Uniform Guidance. Okay? The audit requirements applies to audits of non-federal entity fiscal years beginning on or after December 26th of 2014. So therefore, if you are a nonprofit, you now have to understand your obligation under the uniform guidance. Okay? For nonprofits who are using the calendar year as their fiscal year, these requirements became effective in December 31st of 2015. What does all of this mean? Well, the single audit covers the entire organization's financial operations. They are substantially more detailed than a regular independent audit. A single audit requires higher levels of testing by the independent auditor to establish that the financial statements that are presented fairly and accurately and in accordance with, and this is the key part, federal cost principles. The organization has to have an adequate internal control structure, and the organization is in compliance with any special government regulation or law that applies to specific federal funding. So any non-federal entity that spends more than $750,000 in federal award funds during a fiscal year is required to obtain the single audit. So that is the key aspect of this. You need to ensure that if you do spend over $750,000 that you are completely aware of all of the requirements under the single audit or the uniform guidance. So that is the key. I wanted to make sure that you understood once you start dipping your toe into federal funds. Okay, so sorry, I should have covered that previously. Okay, so going back to the program or the project you're working on, what are the kinds of things that you need to know as a grant writer for your program? First, what the project cost, who will contribute, how much they'll contribute, what requirements, internal accounting controls, again, that has to do with a single audit, and so forth. Okay? A funder or any granting agency, okay, they want to know how much money you need for your entire program, as well as how much money you need from them, and what kind of payment terms or allocation terms that you expect for them to provide you. Is it a grant for multiple years? Is it a grant for a single year? Is it a grant where you have to do a reimbursement from already expended funds? What actually do you have to ensure that you have the internal controls in place to make sure that the funds are spent wisely? Okay. The other thing that you need to think about, okay, is how much time it's going to require for you to actually prepare an application. Okay? People who are seeking grants for a particular program or project only have a certain period of time in order to get that application out the door. I have worked with organizations that may have 4 or 5 grant applications on their desk at any one time. You know, so how much time it takes to actually put a grant application and send it through the system matters. If it's only a couple of days that it'll take you, that's, excuse me, fairly easy. But if it's going to take you 6 weeks or 2 months in order to get the application completed and sent, that is a significant commitment. And you have to ensure that you can carve out the time and that time is worth your effort, the time that it'll take to complete an application. So you have to balance the time that you have available with the time that it takes to actually put down in writing and gather the information you need in order to make sure that the application is complete and sent. So if you have $1 million program and you see an application come across your desk for $10,000, you have to think very strategically if it's an application that will require you, 2 or 3 weeks in order to get that amount of funds. So you have to be careful. Okay? And today, the vast number of programs, especially ones of significance or complexity, will require multiple funding sources. That is a given. Each funding source has a string. The higher the amount awarded, the more strings are usually attached. The more funding resources, the more strings. For example, a car wash to help a team travel to an event, that's a string. A grant for an award to build a playground may have a number of strings, right? A grant to build 10 houses for low-income families could require enough strings to create a long braid. A program to develop and build 100 units of permanent supportive housing with childcare, job training, a computer center, and other services, that could wind up looking like a dust mop. Okay? So, one of the things you've noticed in the course of my training, I talk about a program or a project, and I look at them a little differently. A program is something that is more geared towards a social service type system, whereby you're actually serving individuals with some kind of, say, a counseling or some kind of intervention strategy. So when you are looking at your budget and it is for a program, you strategically think of how many people are going to be served, what kind of geography, referrals, drop-ins, your marketing, how long it will operate, is it ongoing, do you expect it to operate for a long period of time, is it short? Okay. However, if it's a construction project, your thought process might be different, right? First off, if you're constructing something, What is your site control for where you're going to place this particular structure, right? What kind of zoning, if the project is going on a piece of land, and for example, it is a homeless shelter, and all homeless shelters in a particular municipality must be placed in an industrial area. If that land is not zoned for industrial uses, you may have a problem. You will have to go through a zoning code change, or you will have to go through an exception. Whatever is required in your community to ensure that the property is properly zoned, or you have all of the permits to go forward, you have to be aware of that. Also, I've worked with organizations that actually own a project, but they do not manage that project. So if you are not going to be the owner and manager, who is your partner agency and what kind of oversight will they have on the aspects of the program that you are putting into place? The building is going to stand for a certain period of time. How much time is the life of the building considered? Now, we know that big box stores often have a lifespan of about 20 years, but housing projects tend to go for far longer. I know many of the projects that I have seen developed in my area, have requirements that last 99 years. I know I will not be there to ensure that that project meets all its criteria over the course of 99 years. So how is that project being structured so that all of the obligations that are tied to that building, tied to that structure, are going to be met in the future? Okay? If you are constructing a project and it is going to involve federal funds, do you have a full understanding of all of the obligations that you have to meet related to construction? Do you understand what Davis-Bacon wages are? Do you understand Section 3? Do you understand the environmental aspects of review prior to you starting the actual construction? If you don't have that information, you have to fully understand, take classes, ask for help from other agencies that have gone through the process. You have to do your research to make sure that everything is in compliance. If not, you may wind up with a building and all of the resources from the federal government that went into that building may have to be repaid, and that would be a tragedy, right, for your organization and others.
Hey, Pauline, sorry to interrupt. A quick question regarding construction projects.
Sure.
Would renovating a building be considered a construction project in this case, or is that kind of a case-by-case basis?
Actually, renovation can be considered a construction project. It really does depend on the funding sources that go into the actual project itself. Is the project an acquisition/rehabilitation project? So I can't answer that off the top of my head, only because I don't know the scenario, but it is possible that that could be considered a construction project. In addition, many vacant buildings, wind up getting acquired and or reconstructed into another use. So therefore, it may need a review by zoning. It may be a review by the building officials and engineering, and it could be a new use in an existing building, which is terrific. But again, you have some consideration over uniform guidance, how you actually deal with that, and what kind of criteria the federal funds that you'd be using in order to have that reconstruction happen. So I have seen that happen. It just depends on the scenario for the particular project. The big thing of this is that I want you to be aware of is that I've seen agencies, diligently construct a very gorgeous building, but then when it comes after it's operating, that's when things start to become difficult, because in essence, the programs that operate out of the building all need funding as well. And oftentimes the funding streams needed for the kind of social service delivery system that's being proposed to operate in that building, sometimes they fall short. And that can cause a great deal of anxiety among not just the people who own and operate the program, but the people who are then benefiting from the program. So you have to be fully aware if you're going to build something, that you have the resources planned and or in-house to ensure that whatever services are being given at that building can actually be done. You know, you'll have to keep the lights on as well as the staffing for that building. So let's see where we are. You want to ensure that you align the compensation of the staff with the industry standards, taking into account local conditions. Nonprofits are often found to have higher turnover due to lower wages. To compensate, some agencies offer various incentives to staff, such as flexible hours or transit assistance, monthly office events. Anything you can do to retain your staff is important. Okay. So now let's look a little bit more as far as your budget goes. Within a federal application, there is some standard forms that you'll always be asked to complete. However, depending on the application and depending on the program office, at least in far as HUD goes, sometimes you are asked to provide additional information, and it seems redundant in some cases, but each program office and each funding program from a particular program office needs specific information from your agency to determine the cost allocations for a particular type of program. Okay? So the first, of course, is personnel. You know, those are the people who are employed that are going to be paid from the grant or other resources. It could also mean the personnel of the entire organization as the executive director or the chief financial officer. So those are that's some of the information that you'll need. Fringe benefits, your FICA, unemployment, health insurance, retirement taxes, on and on. Travel generally only includes out-of-state travel, but that's not in all cases. It's just a general case. Local travel can also be placed under a budget under the term other. So you need to understand your funding source and what they consider is appropriate for a particular item on the budget and where to put what information. Okay. Supplies, most general purchases go here, and this includes computers. I mean, there was a time, you know, years ago in my youth, computers were so expensive, of course, that they almost had a line in and of themselves. Today, they are considered simply a supply in most cases. If you're going to place information into your budget because you're going to contract for a particular service or a specialist, okay, this could include people, it could include software, leases. Sometimes a subcontract budget will be needed in order for you to have this properly designated on a budget form. There's always usually an other category that could be consisting of rent or telephone costs. It could go there, but it will really depend upon what the applicant wants listed in one's category. Indirect charges, you can only charge this if you have an existing approved indirect cost rate, and I'm going to get into that in a few minutes. And I'm talking specifically here about federal dollars, okay? There's special rules, by the way, for equipment purchases. And again, it goes back to the uniform guidance for additional information, right? When it comes to equipment, equipment is considered non-expendable, tangible, personal property of a certain cost. If it doesn't fit this description, it is not considered equipment, even if it seems like equipment, such as computers. Purchases under the simplified acquisition threshold as described in the uniform guidance, and that runs between $3,000 and $150,000, okay? It's described as simple and informal. So any of these purchases require a lower threshold of competition. They require fewer terms and conditions and could be, depending on circumstance, solicited informally. They may not require a cost and price analysis, and that usually is required when a bid or a negotiated purchase exceeds $150,000. If all of this is confusing to you, what you need to do is speak to a financial advisor or somebody who has this kind of background and understands the uniform guidance. And that will be in your best interest if you're starting to go down the federal funding pipeline in order to receive your funding. Now, I said I was going to mention indirect costs, right? It costs you money to keep your door open. Everybody understands that, right? So under the uniform guidance, 2 CFR Part 200, right? What happened is that the federal government said, we now understand that 100% of our resources that are going into a program or project, right? There is an administrative price for that. And the federal government should be a partner with you and allow you to take a certain percentage of your cost to actually ensure that you are in compliance with all the rules and regulations. So therefore, when they passed the uniform guidance, they said, all right, you can get an indirect cost rate to ensure that you can cover your internal costs in order to expend these federal funds appropriately. Right? Now, if your project or your agency, however, doesn't have an indirect cost rate established and approved by the federal government, we will now allow you a 10% de minimis, which means that you can charge 10% back to your grant, and that is appropriate, in order to ensure that you have the resources internally to comply with all of the federal guidance that you need to do in order for you to ensure that you don't run into trouble, right? Now, indirect costs, they are incurred for common or joint objectives, right? They can't always be identified with a particular final cost objective. This is wording that has come directly from the uniform guidance, right? There is facilities and there's administration. If you've never received a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, it means that you can charge that 10% de minimis. If you have received a NICRA or negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, if you have one, then all federal dollars, regardless of agency, whether you get HUD dollars or HHS dollars or EPA dollars, you will need to use that indirect cost rate within your budgeting procedures. You will have no choice. Okay. Once you have the indirect cost rate, you have to always adhere to it. Now you can go and you can negotiate a new rate if it no longer is appropriate for you. But if you have a rate, that is a rate that has to be used every time you use federal dollars, right? That's just uniform. So what that means is often that, at least in the experience we have had locally in my state, that means that most agencies who are receiving federal dollars have taken on the 10% de minimis rate because they do not have a negotiated rate. Because once you have a negotiated rate, you are stuck with that rate every time you use our resources. It's just the way it is. Now, there is benefits to having a negotiated rate. Oftentimes it's higher than the 10%, but it does take some time in order to get that rate. So it is a judgment call based on your agency and all of the programs and projects that you operate. You can easily charge the 10%, but again, you have to charge that 10% regardless of how you go forward. Okay? So this is sort of the way it operates, right? As far as indirect costs go, right? You can see that here you have a financial management, a manager. He is providing support to both a social service and a housing as well as an education program. So therefore, when they do their indirect cost rate, he will be supported through the three federal programs that he oversees or he is involved with. And that 10% in this case would go towards paying for his salary, whereas a direct cost, which is different, right? That's where a financial manager who's only involved in one program, it's quite possible that his entire financing for his assistants can be charged back to that program as a direct cost. It all depends on the size and the complexity of your agency and the different programs that you operate. If this is confusing or you need more information on this, there are courses that you can take. The uniform guidance is fully spelled out in some training that you can get under OPM, under their website. So again, it's just something that you as a grant writer should be aware of, especially as you develop your budget information going forward. You'll have to understand that if you don't have that negotiated cost rate, that you wind up with that 10% de minimis, and that will then impact the budget information that you put on your forms. You have to be ensured that you have everything in alignment according to the uniform guidance. Okay, so cost sharing and matching funds. Okay, cost sharing, as far as the uniform guidance goes, it defines cost sharing or matching funds as a portion of the project or the program cost that is not paid from sources other than the federal government. The two terms are often used interchangeably, okay? But they are not quite the same. The term matching is a specific type of cost sharing. It's typically used when a sponsor requires the grantee to match the sponsor funding according to a specific ratio. Some sponsors require, say, for example, universities, to reflect their commitment to a project by sharing in its costs. Most sponsors, however, do not require cost sharing, and some don't even allow it. Now, matching funds, okay, they can include non-federal, public or private funds. A match can be either an actual expenditure or cash, or virtual costs as an in-kind contribution. Federal grants typically require the match to come from a non-federal source. Native American tribes have a legislatively created exception to this rule. For most federal grant programs, tribes are allowed to use their Indian self-determination or self-governance funds as non-federal match. The most common type of match and the easiest to track is, of course, the cash match. Cash match is either the grantee's organization's own funds, it could be their general revenue, or a cash donation from a non-federal third party, or by non-federal grants. So it all depends on the terminology that is used in the application process or the application package that you're filling out on how you would determine the kind of matching funds that is appropriate for a particular application or for a program or project. Is there any questions? Okay. Volunteers. Most nonprofits that I have, worked with all have some level of volunteers that offer their time or some kind of service delivery to an organization to see their program operate, serve people that are in need. Okay. Now there is a there is an agency called the Independent Sector that actually does an analysis each year of what an hour of volunteer time actually should be valued. Okay? So right as of July 2020, the national value of an hour of a volunteer is about $27.20. Right? Now that reflects 2019 data. In California, I found out that right now a volunteer is worth, for lack of a better term, $31.50 an hour. Okay, in Utah, where I am, we're at $26.20. So if you are getting a volunteer, or a team of volunteers that are working to ensure your program goes forward, when you are looking at your budget and you are providing some kind of a quote unquote match or some kind of contribution so that you want recognized within an application, especially a private application, right? You can estimate how many volunteers, are involved in your service delivery system based on the hours that they serve and come up with some kind of value that those individuals contribute to the ongoing effort of your program, right? So they are worth money. Now, one caveat, the independent sector is just that. It is a site that gives you this information as an estimate. And of course, these hours are considered, general labor, and as if you were to hire somebody, this is what you would actually pay them in salary and benefits. Right? But, and I caution people, at least locally where I am, if your volunteers, if you depend on 100 volunteers during a Christmas drive of some type, that's terrific. And you would have them sign in and sign out so you can calculate how many hours a particular volunteer contributed over the course of, say, a program, maybe a month. Right? So you would look at all of your volunteers, how many hours were contributed, come up with a set determined estimate, right? And say that that number of people who you did not have to pay actually provided a service value of X. Right? So that's terrific and that's wonderful. And people may incorporate that into a budget as this is a contribution of match for a particular program or project that requires a match, or that just wants to know what kind of assets are being contributed from a community. That's terrific. However, if you are providing a service, right, and you place that kind of information within your application, if others who are seeking funding from that particular funder, for example, says their volunteers are only $15 an hour, there is a discrepancy there. So you have to have a feel for the actual considered value of your volunteers when they help ensure that you have the kind of matching requirements that an applicant or a grantor wants to see, to make sure that you can explain why your volunteers are worth a heck of a lot more than your neighbors. Right? So you just need to be aware of the standard. And as you communicate with people in your program delivery system that provides resources to individuals in your community that you're working with, you can ask them how they count their volunteers, what kind of level of benefit. The other thing, remember, is that a volunteer is very different if they're providing general labor versus a professional service. A professional service is considered very different. You would have to determine that, what the actual value of, say, a doctor, an architect, a legal consultant, an accountant, if they are providing pro bono assistance to you, what is the general hour salary for that individual, because they are now not providing general labor, they're providing a professional service, and that is handled differently. So you really need to understand, how to ensure that you have information in your application, when you place a value on your volunteers of what they've contributed to your service delivery and how you can justify that maybe in your budget narrative. So, story time. Okay. I don't have to read this to you. No. It just allows me to catch up a bit on my notes. So again, in kind, well, you have to be careful about what you say you want as far as in kind services. Okay. So how do you explain your costs and your assets to a grantor when you're filling out your application, right? There's different ways that you would be required to document what cost and what assets you have coming into a program, right? You can do a letter of commitment, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes, a memorandum of understanding or a contract with another service partner. You would, if some entity is providing you the land of which your program or project, actually your project, I guess, would be constructed on, you know, what is the actual appraised value of that land? Okay. Volunteers, we already went through that. And of course, there's always, almost always, especially in federal applications, sections where you would want to provide a budget narrative that supports how your line items were identified. How did you get to the budget information that you have provided on your forms? One of the things you need to be aware of is what it means to provide in an application a letter of commitment, right? That's very different than a letter of support. Right? In order to get a letter of commitment to be fully recognized by a funder, it should contain very specific information. First, the first recommendation is make sure it's on letterhead, all right? And it is dated. You would send in probably a scanned copy of a letter of commitment along with your grant application package, where you would keep the original on file. You want to make sure that that letter is signed by somebody with authority to commit those resources to your project. Right? You want to make sure that the letter of commitment names your agency as the agency receiving the funds. It is very interesting how I've seen applications where letters of commitment are so vague that they are discarded. And that's why I'm going through this specifically with you. Hello? Okay. The program and the funds that the particular funder is actually providing assistance to. What is the grant program's name? Okay. Time frame. If a funder is giving you $100,000 and the project is to go for 3 years, for example, is that $100,000 going to be committed with no strings attached, you can spend it at will, or is it going to be $100,000 whereby a portion of it is going to be given each year? Those are that's the kind of information that you need to be aware of, not only in how you structure your application, but how your program is going to impact the structure of your agency and its requirements to see a program go forward. What is the source of funds? If it's a private foundation that's providing you assistance, then they would be able to just say it's from their general allocation for the year. And if there's any special conditions, many times a funder will commit funds to a particular program to see it go forward, but there is certain conditions in order for those funds to be released, such as if you do not receive your federal dollars for this particular program or project that you're seeking assistance in, then our funds will not go to support your agency. So sometimes there is conditions. This is an example of a letter of commitment. You have this in the slide, so I won't go over it. But again, it is very different than a letter of support. You know, there's a story I tell of a gentleman, as I mentioned previously, maybe in some of the other classes, that I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and this gentleman was from also not far from an agency community that I lived in, and he came to me one time a very long time ago and said, I had in my application to HUD, you know, somewhere to the tune of 17 letters of commitment. And when I looked at his letters of commitment, they actually, most of them were letters of support. When I looked at his budget and I looked at the letters that he included in his application package, and I added all of the commitment resources that were listed in the letters, and I compared that to his budget estimates, they did not match. So it is imperative for you to ensure that after you have completed your application, you go back to all of your letters of commitment, look at the terms and the allocation of resources that they determine that you have, and make sure it's properly reflected on your budget. You know, it can trip you up if it doesn't. This is just an example of a budget that I happen to like. Part of it is because it shows what the request is. It shows that a particular project's budget is reflected, as well as the percent of total income to the program area in question. And then it also shows, of course, the total organization's budget and how much a particular program is impacting the total organization's budget. I do think it is helpful if you have this level of detail available to you. It may not be required in every application, but it is really helpful when you're filling out an application package to really truly understand how a particular program impacts the overall operating budget of your agency. Okay, so suggestions, and again, this is exactly what they are. It's just my suggestions to you. Federal grants, as I mentioned previously, have standard budget forms, but oftentimes you are required to fill in more than one budget for a federal grant. You know, so you have to have as much information when you go into the process as possible, because they might ask you, you know, over and over in an application for you to describe your program allocations and where your funds are going to be coming from, as well as going to, right? What is also you have to think about is when the money is going to come in and when the money needs to go out, right? You need to understand the cash flow issues related to a program or project. You know, you have to have this information to make sure that you have an ability to always meet your debt obligations as a program goes forward. Right? Right? So as an example, as I mentioned previously, there is a budget narrative that is required in most applications. So therefore, this is an example, whereas personnel, in this case, you would list each position that pertains to the proposal. The calculation should show an employer's salary, the percentage of time devoted to a particular project. In this case, there's International Affairs Project Director at $50,000 a year. 20% of that salary is coming from a particular funding agency in this application. So what is that person going to do related to the overall project that's worth $10,000, and you describe that. Now, a program coordinator for a particular project that we're talking about in this case, that program coordinator in this case has a $35 an hour times 4 hours a day times 5 days in a month times 12 months. So therefore it's $8,400. And what is that coordinator now responsible for? right? And if that is going to be covered by matching funds, you would want to say that in your application. So this is another, it could be considered lame, but I thought it was rather cute. So it gives you a little bit of time to think back on all of the information that I provided so far. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat box and I can go over them now. Okay. As far as federal dollars go, again, they are usually, especially for HUD, it's all done on a reimbursable basis. Right? So you have to have some level of funding in-house ready to spend in order for you to be able to then get reimbursed and have the appropriate documentation on what was spent, how it was spent, how it meets the absolute objective as described in your application, right? And then HUD and another federal agency will then provide those funds back to your organization. Okay? So when you are putting together a large application for especially for a complex program, and you're seeking federal dollars, a lot of times that you have to spend the resources you have already accumulated in-house and then ask for reimbursement with information to the funding agency on what the items that you had incurred, what kind of debt you had incurred, and how it meet the overall objectives based on the budget that was submitted in your original application and any kind of contractual agreements that you have with the agency. Once you have a grant award, you are under contract with the federal government, and you have to abide by all the rules and requirements and the submission requirements and information requirements and on and on. So you need to understand fully the obligation that you have placed your agency under so that the reimbursement can be made in a timely manner. If financing is not something that you have a strong background in when it comes to the actual budgeting and understanding the uniform guidance or some of the rules that are required to purchasing, you know, if you are the primary person in your organization that is going to be in charge of all of this, then it might behoove you to take an accounting or financing class specifically related to federal assets. Okay. You can also, of course, look for a workshop that might be right now online that you can get additional information in. You can look at books. There's some nonprofit assistance out there specific to nonprofit financing. You can look at the 990s for nonprofit organization and foundations. I'll go over that in a few minutes. Be very familiar with your organization's annual report. It is critically important that you have a good feel for the financial condition of your agency. Try as you can best to be within the conversation that goes on with your organization's budget processing. Remember, once you receive funding, especially from a federal agency, your organization now has an obligation utilizing federal dollars. If, heaven forbid, that they were misspent, you have, you know, some obligations that you'll have to come to terms with, such as number one, probably paying all of the funds back. Number two, were the funds spent by mistake or in error, or was there fraud? If there was fraud, of course, then you are in violation of federal law, and you are subject to not just fines but imprisonment. So you have to truly understand your obligations once you do get federal dollars. Now, the thing about federal dollars, why people go there, why people ask for federal dollars is because they usually provide a great deal of support to an organization. They are a very high funding agency. They have a lot of requirements, but they also provide often a great deal of resources. So that is why agencies do seek federal dollars if their particular program or project is eligible for those dollars. Secondly, when you obtain federal dollars, your partner agency understands that you have to meet that federal test. I had a conversation years ago with someone who had applied for federal dollars over the course of 3 years. In the third year, he did get the funds from the federal government. And his statement to me was, that was the gold standard. He says, once we had those dollars, other funding agencies, other partners came to us and provided us the other resources that we needed. And many of the private foundations and other funding entities out there, once you do have federal dollars, they are aware of all of the requirements that are tied to those dollars. So oftentimes it gives them a security that you are going to be doing what you need to be doing to keep those dollars flowing. That because the oversight is so heavy, that they can now feel more comfortable that you have the full capacity to ensure that the program goes forward as described in your application. So it is important, you know, and that's why people go down that road, getting federal dollars. All right. So now we're going to talk about submissions and rules and things to keep in mind when you are going for federal dollars, right? Of course, you have to understand the submission requirements and you have to follow the golden rule. Those with the gold set the rules. If, thank goodness they don't do this, but if the federal government were to require a hard copy of your application and they wanted it on pink paper and purple ink, that makes no sense to you. It doesn't make sense to me. But if that were to be a requirement, guess what? You don't ask the question as to why, you just give them the application on pink paper with purple ink. You know, you are not there to question the application process or procedures. You are there to obtain resources for your project or your program. You know, and sometimes I have seen applications, especially from small private foundations, that really are very odd and make very little sense and have some really strange requirements. But if it is worth your time, because the amount of funds you can get from that funder is significant to your program, then by all means, whatever kind of submission process they have, whatever kind of requirements that they have as far as information, you just have to understand that it is their resources and they must be followed. And you can ask the question, but the only thing you need to do is just follow the guidelines. There is an application for a private foundation in Colorado that I use when I do my grant training workshop in person. And the application requires certain forms to be actually filled out on green paper, certain forms to be submitted on tan paper, and the overall application can be submitted on white paper. And it has a very strange submission process on top of that. I use it as an example because of the fact that, again, it is highly unusual, especially today, to have that kind of application sent in mail. Secondly, I use it because the amount of funds that is offered to nonprofits who are doing a program or project is somewhere to the tune of $25,000. The application itself is a little different for a whole host of reasons. And that is where I go through the fact that because of these strange submission requirements, Is it worth the time and the effort for an organization who is doing a large, complex project to ensure that you have the proper amount of green and tan paper? Again, it's a decision that gets made, at the agency level. I don't have an answer to that, but it is a very unique application, especially for today. So it goes back to, is it worth your time? Is it worth the kind of scrutiny that the application would have? Okay, so with that being said, so where do you start? You have finished your application. One thing often in applications today, you are required to submit a summary statement of some kind, either at the beginning, an executive summary, or a one-page synopsis of the actual application for funding. I recommend to agencies that come to my class to not prepare such a summary until the very, very end of your application process. And then what I suggest you do is go through your application and pull out all of the specific relevant points that you have made versus 1 or 2 sentences on need, 2 or 3 sentences or 4 on your capacity, what your vision, what your mission statement as an organization is. Third, it is what you're actually going to do with the money. Fourth, you want to make sure that is very clear what you want that funder to actually award you, the total you're asking from them, the total so far that's been committed to your organization's program is second, the length of time the program will go on, and how many people will be served not only by the program itself, but an estimate of how much the funding agency that you're requesting the funds from, how much service delivery will happen because of their commitment to your organization for this project. The amount of match you already have obtained should also go into a project summary, and then spend a paragraph on the evaluation strategies that you will undertake to ensure that your program made a difference. Information on who to contact if they have further questions. And all of that gets summarized into the initial statement of executive summary or whatever kind of summary statement a particular applicant wants from you. Okay. So if you are able, if you have the capacity in your organization to assemble an actual team of people to help you manage a large grant application, right, that is terrific, right? You would first work with your team and provide them with the sections of the application package, right, describing the information that is required, right? Hold an initial meeting, okay? You want to make sure that you have assigned tasks and timeframes to everyone on the team. And you want to make sure that you stay on track and that everyone on that team is aware that the clock is ticking. If you don't have a team of people to work with you, all right, if you're working solo on an application, all right, how I did it was I used to take the application, look at the due date, look at a calendar, circle the due date, and then start counting backwards. Because the due date, of course, is only there as a guide. Right? The due date, it absolutely has to, you have to submit the submit button on your computer on a particular day. But is that the true day that you need that application submitted? What actually has to occur prior to that? right? And you start backing off from that date and you decide, all right, who has to sign off on this? What kind of documentation is required? Who is actually going to be the final approver of this particular application? What is that person or body's schedule? When I worked in Salt Lake City, of course, was the city council, right? That I had to have all of my applications approved by. If you have that kind of a situation where your board must approve the final obligation to your organization under a federal grant, right? When do they meet? How often do they meet? How much information do you have to provide them? Are they a board that is fully engaged and want a full presentation? Or are they a board that will simply sign off on any application that you submit? This is the kind of information you need to know to really determine how much time you have from the day that that application reaches your inbox or your desk to the day that you have to be able to submit it through the application procedures required. As I mentioned when we went through the initial application packages at the beginning of this grant training, right? We broke the grant application down into segments. The first, of course, is what the need of the community is. The second was the capacity of your organization. I suggested in the first class that this type of information should be prepared in advance and be available to you. So now you have this application on your desk. You do not have to run around to try to answer the questions related to your organization's capacity. You don't have to find more than, say, one or two other citations related to need. You can now spend the greater amount of your efforts on the actual work plan, the evaluation strategy, and your budgeting, because you have already done the research of your organization and the need in the community. Proofreaders, they are absolutely invaluable to you. Once you have your application drafted, right, before you submit it, either electronically to a foundation or to the federal government, you absolutely want to make sure that that application has been reviewed. My strongest suggestion is that it's reviewed by two people at a minimum. The first is somebody with a good understanding of the program. You know, that if it is an education grant, it is somebody who is fully engaged in the education system, what kind of information is going to be given to students, what the acronyms are in an application related to educational programs. Health and Human Services, the same. Right? The second person is someone who is very good at grammar, spelling, punctuation, context, and also hopefully has the ability to review the budget as well. If they don't have a financial background, you may want to seek a third person to make sure that the financial information in your budget makes sense. You know, I have seen many applications rejected because they have not followed either the budget information that is required, you know, or again, their documentation does not match their commitment to the programs, such as their matching dollars, or there isn't appropriate information that has been provided. So it is incredibly important that you make sure that you have those reviews before you would ever consider submitting an application electronically to whatever funding agency you need. Take their information and their critique of your application very seriously. If it doesn't make sense to them, then it may not make sense to the reviewer, especially in a federal agency. Remember, most federal agencies are headquartered in Washington, D.C. They have no idea what your community per se may look like. They do not understand what it takes to get a bid for a project. They do not understand what your workforce looks like. They do not understand your geography. So you have an opportunity to educate them through the narrative that you provide, but they will never truly walk in your shoes. Right? So you have to be very clear and very concise in the language that you use in the descriptions of your program so that they can get an understanding of what you face locally and how your organization, given the proper resources, can actually see this problem addressed. And the reason I always say addressed and not completely wiped out is because there are some needs that we will never have the resources in our control to completely eradicate a problem. It would be nice if we could, but most of the time agencies cannot do that. You are going to address a problem. And if you are 80, 60, 90, 92% successful, that is tremendous. 100% is almost impossible in a social service world to ensure that 100% of the people are fully served and all of their needs met. So you are going to address everything you can with the resource you have to see the outcome that you're seeking. Okay. All right. Where to find funding and where to find help. Let's start off with information related to HUD. All right. Here is our HUD Exchange website list, and this is actually found under the Housing Counseling Webinar Archives. And if you see here, you will see information on training, and you will see information on contracting, as well as information on grants. You can pull up information that will give you details on either webinars or documents that can help you navigate all of the different aspects of a particular grant. As you can see, there is under Training Digest, completing the form SF 425. That's a standard form 425. Standard form 425 is used by almost, I'd say, to the tune of 80 some odd % of the agencies. It's the standard initial form that goes on the front of an application for federal dollars. So again, you can find training that is readily available. It's free to actually guide you through different particular aspects of a funding application and or information that will help guide you through understanding all of the criteria that is involved with a federal application. You can see that this talks about financial management systems, indirect cost rates, grant financial reporting. All of this information is readily available, and if you are new to grant writing and this is something that has not been your history, then I strongly advise you is to take a look at this kind of information that is available. Even if you are not seeking dollars from HUD, you may be seeking dollars from another federal agency, but this is some basic information that might be helpful. Okay, so now when you go to submit the application, what happens? All right, be aware that registration procedures exist, and you absolutely must ensure that it meets that it gets submitted on time. I strongly advise that if at all possible, you submit the application 72 hours in advance. And if that's impossible, then 48 hours. The earlier you can submit, the better off you are as an applicant for funding. It relieves a big burden off your shoulders. Plus, if there is an error in some form of the application submission, you will have then a notification and you will have a bit of time to correct whatever problem exists in the application submission process. This is critically important. I have had instances where people do talk to me and they said, I tried to submit my application and it won't go in. And it turns out that they have a problem with their registration system. They had expired, they did not renew their submission requirements, and it was a mess. So you really want to ensure, and I'm sure most of you who have dealt with federal dollars understand that the sooner you can submit something, the better off you are. Okay. For you to register, for you to apply for federal dollars, you have to understand what grants.gov. I'm going to get into that in a few minutes. But grants.gov is the key place that you will find application packages as well as the submission process. Remember, you want to ensure that you have fully understood the NOFA prior to filling it out, as well as at the point where submission comes into play. If there are citations or regulations that are unfamiliar with you, ask the agency for clarification. Don't skip them because you do not understand a particular aspect of an application. Ask for someone to explain exactly the kind of information that the application is asking for. Once an agency is awarded and accept federal dollars, there's an obligation to comply with the program requirements. Again, as I mentioned, failure to comply is serious. Agencies who do not comply are generally required to pay any expended funds back to the government. So what happens when you submit an application? As you can see on the left, we are the grantor, and as you can see on the right, you are the applicant. Grants.gov is for lack of a better term, sort of like a bucket, all right? You submit information into grants.gov. We as an agency submit information into grants.gov. It is a process that goes back and forth, right? Grants.gov is a portal that's sort of like a holding station, right? When an application gets developed, it is developed in HUD by usually a program office, right? Let's take, for example, public housing. If public housing has an application for the Family Self-Sufficiency Program that they want to see let out this year, it's one of those legacy programs that we have funded for a long time. So public housing staff look at the existing application package that had been put together for the current year and know that it's going to be put together for the upcoming fiscal year. So what they do is they look at the textual information to make sure that nothing substantial has changed, such as the citations under uniform guidance, all right? They look at any improvements to the program or any changes to the program that should go forward for this current year. That gets incorporated into the package. It goes through a review, right? Once it gets thoroughly vetted and reviewed, and there is an appropriation from Congress, sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, then it gets not only published in the Federal Register, it gets sent to grants.gov. And grants.gov becomes the holder of the program application packages. Once the Federal Register shows everyone that this application is available, it then is out for application processing, and entities like a public housing authority then actually goes into grants.gov, pulls the application specifically down. Once it is in their system, that is a unique application package that, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, belongs to the public housing authority. Each application that is requested through the grants.gov system is actually embedded with a specific information that makes it that agency's application. it is coded internally so that that application package can be tracked back. It's not just with the information that is placed in grants.gov. It's more complex than that. Once the application is completed, once the Public Housing Authority has completed their family self-sufficiency application, it goes back to grants.gov. Remember, I said that 72-hour window is a minimum. Say they submitted it 72 hours in advance. Once the closing date happens, once the application timeline is up and no more applications can be received, grants.gov then ships it over back to HUD. HUD then internally sends it to the appropriate parties within the agency that will review the application package. Usually it's back to the program office that prepared it. They then in turn provide those applications to the appropriate staff reviewers with a set series of guidelines on how to score the application. Once those applications are scored, right, they're placed within the system along with the absolute funding limitation that is available to the program, whether it's 2 million, 12 million, whatever millions of dollars have been appropriated. The very top grant that receives the highest score gets everything funded, and then it goes from there. Once there is no funding left to be awarded, everyone else has fallen below the threshold, and therefore they are no longer able to receive funding from the agency under the program for that fiscal year. Right? So once the review has been completed, if you are, if your application has met all the criteria and it's scored very high, you then, of course, are successful. You received a notification that the funds will be awarded to you, and then there's some obligation on yours end and HUD's end to do the appropriate paperwork to make sure that those funds can flow to your agency. Okay. So one of the things I want to mention to you is that the way the federal government looks at funds, all right? Right now we have systems in place at the federal level to show the actual awards from Congress that appropriate funds to the agency. Right? That appropriation shows up in a website such as this about how much an agency has, quote unquote, in its coffers in order to address the needs of the community, all right, based on all of the federal criteria that is out there for HUD, for its program offices, right? So when you get an award and you start expending funds and you place your request for reimbursement within the electronic system, that then is reflected in the overall budget of the agency, showing what has been awarded, what has been put aside, and then what has actually been expended. I'm mentioning this because if you think of it on a larger scale, that as a citizen, you know that there are needs out in the community, you want federal dollars to address those needs. An agency has then has asked for and has gotten an award for funds. And when you look at the actual amount of dollars that gets expended from that agency, sometimes it looks like it's very low, and you know those awards were made. So when you as an agency obtain those federal dollars, it behooves you to ensure that you timely request reimbursement of those dollars from your agency. Yes, there is more paperwork involved in requesting federal dollars, but it is important for that you spend those federal dollars in a very timely manner. Remember, you told in your application that there's this critical, necessary need in your community. You've got a population that is desperate for these monies. And if those monies are awarded, and then Congress turns around and takes a look at a report like this And they said, but we awarded all these resources and they're not being used. You know, they're sitting there. It is very difficult then for an agency to come back to Congress and say, we need more money. We need money next year because the need is so great. So it is critically important for agencies overall, if they are receiving federal dollars, that they utilize those dollars to the best of their ability as soon as possible, only because it is reflected overall in the accounting systems in the federal government, and that we want to see expenditures made as soon as possible. One of the things I want to mention is grants.gov. I mentioned it a few minutes ago. I don't know how many of you might be aware of grants.gov. This is the portal that all of our applications for funding get sent to. Most federal agencies send their RFPs, their grant applications, requests for funding. They get sent through the grants.gov system. It's been around for a long time. There have been major advancements on the system that you may or may not be aware of, but this is where you go to actually apply for any federal dollars. This is just one of the intro screens. Grants.gov has made an advancement. It is called Workspace. There is training on what Workspace is, but in essence, what it allows an agency to do is to fill out a grant application using the Grant Workspace website, whereby you as an entity filling out an application, say you're the lead grant writer, and you have people within your agency that is going to help you. They can be assigned specific roles to Workspace so that you do not have to, say, email back and forth specific aspects of your application. You can all be assigned roles to fill out particular sections of a grant application through the Workspace site. It also permits you, as, say, the lead of a grant application team, to send aspects of the application package to people outside of your direct agency so that they can, say, work on the education section on a large complex grant that includes education as part of the delivery system. So if you are not providing that particular part of this program or project, you are sending that piece off to individuals who are going to provide, you know, the grant, job training or some other kind of educational service to young people, and they then complete that and send it back within the Workspace. It is to streamline the need for organizations to go back and forth with outside organizations and internal staff to make sure everything stays in one place. It is a somewhat complex system due to the assignment of roles and responsibilities. It is not required that you utilize it. It is there to assist you. However, I do know that some of the less advanced nonprofits we have do not use Workspace. They instead rely on their old system and then go into Workspace and just complete an application as the lead entity. It is completely up to you, but it is available to you. And there's some training on it that I would suggest that you take. Right. What other kind of help is out there besides the HUD Exchange? There is the Foundation Center and GuideStar, and they're now considered Candid as their moniker today. All right. You also have the Grantsmanship Center. Some of the information that you see in my presentation actually comes from information that I learned as going through the Grantsmanship Center training. They do have a 5-day applicant workshop that they conduct, and they also have one specific for federal dollars. They are terrific. You can do a lot online through their training application processes and grant training. I will tell you they are not cheap, especially their in-person training is expensive, but they do a great job. The University of Wisconsin some of the slides that I showed you through the logic model exercise that we had, they provide a great deal of information, and they're very helpful if you need more information on the logic model. The Keller's Foundation, again, also offers a great guide on logic models. And Michigan State University has some great resources related to grants as a whole. You can, this is an example, a web page from the Grantsmanship Center's website related to, for example, budgeting, all right? And they do online training. I'm not an advocate saying that this is something you should do. I'm just saying that is something that is available to you. These trainings are not always free, but information from the Grantsmanship Center, their newsletter is free, and it's an avenue that you can take. GrantSpace, this is an advancement on the Grantsmanship Foundation Center. They created Candid, as I mentioned a minute ago, and they give you a lot of information. Again, this is all free, on how to develop, for example, cover letters. Private funders often will request that you provide them with a letter of inquiry before you even go down the road of an actual grant application. So they give you information on a whole host of documentation that's out there that's totally free. And I strongly advise you take a look at it, especially if you're new to the grant writing process. Okay. HUD Exchange, I talked about this a few minutes ago. There is some small contractor initiative training that is now placed on our website. If you are not, even if you are a nonprofit, you may also create a business enterprise that will earn resources for your organization under a business arrangement. So if you are looking to create, or you have partners who are small businesses, you can look to our website and actually get additional information that can advance a small contractor, obtain additional resources using HUD, using federal dollars. In a completely different form. It would not be necessarily a grant. It would be actually an enterprise. You would have an individual business. So that is now out there, and it is possible it could be useful to you as you work with other agencies in your community. Okay. So, as we mentioned at the beginning, I will answer your questions now if you have any, but next week I will be available. I will make myself available from 9:30 to 11:30 to anybody who has any questions related to anything I spoke about directly. And now I'd just like to turn attention quickly over to the supplementary materials that you received. One was significantly large. Right? There is a lot of information within that package that I actually use when I go through my full 2-day grant writing workshop. Included in that are things such as dealing with a board of directors, ensuring, for example, that there are job descriptions for members of your board. I go through strategic planning and information on how to conduct a SWOT analysis for your organization, so they really can focus in on the strengths and the weaknesses and the needs and objectives. I give you information on logic models. You also have a form that has a matrix on it, and it is called the self-sufficiency model. I usually go through that and explain how you can use a platform that describes people who go through the initial stages of your program all the way to the end based on their individual accomplishments or their individual needs, and how, as you conduct your program and you evaluate them over time, you can then take that information and then quantify the actual impact that your program has had on the population. I give you a list of resources beyond simply what I've provided here as far as where to go for more help. And I hope that all of this information over the last couple of days have been useful to you. Has anybody got any questions? Please post them in the chat box. Okay. We have the added advantage today to have another guest speaker, and I don't know if she's on yet. Robert, is Shivani there?
Yes, I believe she is. But first, just want to thank you, Pauline, so much for these 3 fantastic training sessions. And just so everyone knows, as you can see on the last slide there, Pauline's email is available for any and all questions you have, and we will be sharing out after today's session the recordings for not only this session, but the first 2 sessions, along with the training materials to go along with it to everyone's emails. And we are also, as Pauline alluded to, are very excited today to have Shivani Bozarella from the California State Library joining us to go over an additional resource that's fairly new. Pauline talked a bit about grants.gov, and State of California has introduced grants.ca.gov. So this will be a more California-specific grants portal, still in kind of the nascent stages, but Shivani will be able to go much more in depth into kind of the maneuvering, accessibility of this portal and answer any and all questions that you have. Shivani?
Thank you, Robert. Hi, everyone. My name is Shivani Bozarella. Like Robert said, I'm with the California State Library. I'm here to present a tool that went out for grant seekers in July. It was a way for a legislation that it was driven by a legislation. So I'm going to share my slide deck so you guys can follow along. I'll give you guys insight on what it is and also walk you through it. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for being here. I know you guys have been learning for the last 3 days, a lot of different information. So one more thing to take away before the end of this. So grants.ca.gov is a portal for a single website for grant seekers to find all state of California grant opportunities in the portal in one place. So the legislation was passed in 2018. The project started July 1, 2019, with the legislative deadline of July 1, 2020. So that's kind of the legislation asked to make sure that the California State Library asked all state agencies who administer grant opportunities and including loans and first come award, they're on competitive and first come award process. So that's kind of the definition that is listed here. What the legislation drove and what's on the portal today is all grants that are state administered regardless of the funding. So they could be a state or federal funding there. They are competitive in nature and or first come award process, including loans or federal assistance funds. That's the main bulk of what's there. Our goal was to create a tool that will allow the grant seekers to find, view, or compare different grants opportunities, better positioning them to ultimately apply for those for which they are best suited for. And the data set that was created, it was created from scratch. So the state agencies, this never existed before. So before, grant seekers were looking for grant opportunities in the state of California by going to different departments and hoping that they'll find a grant that they're eligible for, or they were on their listserv and they were just applying for the same grant every time. And not knowing what other options, other opportunities that might be available in the state, based on their search and the keywords that they're looking for. So today I'm going to show you the showcase of the grants.ca.gov, looking at how to filter, how you can find what you're looking for, and if there's opportunities that are active versus opportunities that you can potentially track and for future reference, and then when they become available by the state agency, then you can apply for them and where to go for those things. So that's kind of in a nutshell what the legislation drove. I wanted to kind of go over a little bit on how we developed this site. I know that a lot of you, are representing different areas. We wanted to build this tool. We knew that this tool wouldn't work if it wasn't built for the user, right? So, and we took a serious time listening to and learning from our stakeholders. So we had grant seekers and grant makers, who are the state agencies, so that the final product reflected all of their needs and make a smoother experience for both of them. We connected the actual applicants who will be using this site. So we reached out to Cal Nonprofit, who represents over 10,000 nonprofits. We reached out to local government and League of Cities. We had county representation. And then we also, over time, compiled a list of subscribers who had individuals in it. We did learn that individuals are also provided grant opportunities by the state that are administered. So we wanted to make sure all of them were comprehensively inclusive of all of those folks. And so we had the list of 900 subscribers that we used to connect with throughout the development of the project. So that's how we kind of got their feedback, iterative a process of creating this website to make sure what's out there today is actually useful and people are able to use it. It's simple and it's not overwhelming to when you go to a website trying to look for resources. So that's kind of how the approach was and how we created the site. It is open data and open source code. So today, if you go to data.cia.gov, you can actually download a CSV file with all the data that is being generated on the portal. So for folks who are in the business side or looking to help others find grant opportunities, they can pull this with the API, which is more of an automated way to pull our data into their system. Okay. A little more technical than some of you might want to know, but I'm going to actually escape from here, reshare my screen so I can show you what grants.cia.gov actually looks like. Okay, so grants.cia.gov, this is the homepage. When you come to the homepage, it gives you an opportunity to kind of find the same information, but different ways. So we know that some of you might be more visual and want to look for things more visually and not have to fill out things. So I'll walk you through how there's different ways to get into the same information. One way is you can fill out this sentence that says, I am it could be a business, individual. These are all the applicant types that we have. And we wanted to have other just in case we missed someone, and the state agencies, when they're filling out to them, they're supposed to specify so that if we see that there's a lot of volume of grants being submitted for those applicant types, we will add the applicant types here. So you can see there's business, individual, nonprofit, public agency, which includes all education institutions. It includes local government, includes anything county, all of those, and higher education as well, so UCs and others. So public agencies, a big, broader way to include all of them. And then tribal government, that includes federal and state. And then we have funding. So you can fill out a category. We have like around 19 or so categories that are very broad to make sure that they're not overwhelming for someone to look for. And so the state departments are also including making sure that they can specify what category their grant falls under. So let's say if you're looking for disaster relief. So you'll see up here, there's disaster prevention and relief. So you could just select that. And then you could say, oh, sorry, I clicked on something accidentally. Going back. So once you click on disaster prevention and relief, it'll show up here. You don't have to fill out the other two. And then you could just say, show me the opportunities. So what it does is it filters the opportunities just that are categorized under disaster prevention and relief. So, or you can see everything, and I'll show you that how to get there as well in a minute. Down here, we have resources for California State Library has put together. frequently asked questions, how this information gets here, all those kind of things that you might be interested in just generally understanding. We have a glossary. Glossary basically gives you an understanding of what the departments are filling out. So all the fields that are being collected for each grant opportunity is in a standardized way. What do they all mean? So there's definitions with the fields just to understand what information is being collected from the departments. And then you can also search by categories. So it's more visual appealing. You can say, I want to look for environment, water, or health and human services, things like that. So we have those categories here, or you can see all categories here, and all of the different categories will display. We have, again, applicant type. You can click a bubble box, takes you the same place. Down here, we have recently posted. So this gives you an overview of what's being posted, recently. So like this was what 10 hours ago was published by Department of Wildlife Conservation Board. So, and this is under disadvantaged community category. So it gives you an overview if you're looking for just a quick glance over what's being added. Here we have 143 total grant opportunities that are on the portal that are active, which means you can apply for them, or they're forecasted, which means they are not open, but you have information to start kind of tracking that. And we'll go into that a little bit in a minute. You can see that 7 of the grants were added past week, and there's $18.1 billion available in current funding by those grant opportunities. It's just to give you a little bit of a glance on statistics. So let's say if you wanted to see everything, at this point, you're not sure, you just want to see what's in the portal. You'll go to the Find Grants up here. So when you click on it, it'll take you to this page. Again, you have glossary up here, you have FAQs. You can actually save your refinements on this page. So in other words, I'm going to actually type in disaster relief. Or actually, that's a category, so I can actually pick a category. So I'm going to put disaster prevention relief. It automatically defaults forecasted and active. So it'll show you those two the type of grant that are open in that category. Closed are the old ones that are already closed. You can't apply for, but you can still view the information that, in case you're interested in seeing what was added last year, or when we get there, next year will be this year, you can look at all that information historically. Okay, so in this case, it's only going to pull out forecasted and active and disaster prevention and relief. So as you can see, these are all categorized in that category by those departments. These are all active. This one is forecasted. So you can see that there's, there's forecasted grants here as well. And then let's see if we can do homeless or social services. So I can clear my search, or I can save this current refinement. So if I do a save current refinement, which means in the future, I just want to be able to come back to this portal and pull all disaster prevention relief related grants, and I don't want to search for anything else. You can just save that search, and it will save a cookie on your browser, and you won't have to put in any information. You'll just get to that page. So this tells you include forecasted and active opportunities, any agency, categories, disaster prevention relief, and so forth. And you could just say, yes, save my search, or no thanks. So that gives you an opportunity to not have to come back and do this whole thing over again. Okay, so let's look for homelessness, see what's out there. I'm actually going to clear my search first. Okay. So there are 2 grants that are related to homeless. So what it does is it search for that word in any of the grant opportunities. So I'm going to show you, let's say I'm interested in this one. I just want to see what this is. So it tells you the purpose. The eligible applicants must be in a public agency. Eligible geographic requirements. You says see Appendix A. So I'm actually going to go and say, I want to look a little bit more detail. This is too small for me. I want to blow it up and see everything. So again, it tells you what department it's from. You can also note the portal ID. If in case you want to just come back to that portal ID and just type in the portal ID, you can just pull it up that way. Purpose, description tells you a bit more on what it is. As I go down, this is all the information that is provided by Department of Housing and Community Development. It tells you eligible applicants at public agencies, and it gives you a little bit more insight on what that means. And then on the side here, because it's an active grant opportunity, these fields are required by the legislation, so they have to fill these some of these out. So tells you important dates that you can remember when an application deadline is. It's at 5 p.m. on the 30th of November, and so forth. Funding details, what the total available funding is. If they have any expected number of awards, they will put that here. But dependent means it depends on the application process. So when you hover over the field, it tells you what that means. So it gives you all the tooltips that you may need to know. If it has letter of intent, so forth. So it gives you all that information that you might be able to review in like a few minutes to see if you're eligible for it before you actually review the RFP, which you have to go to the grant guidelines URL. That will take you back to the Department of Housing and Community Development website, and where you can read the RFP, apply the way their process is. And then you come back here, you can also look at the resources, and you can see if there's any planned events. So there's a lot of workshops, sometimes they do public hearings and things like that. You can actually get to those by clicking their link, because they'll update event dates and so forth, and keep track of it that way. Okay. Any questions so far? You feel free to put them in into the chat box. See, there's is there a place to upload? I'm not sure, what do you mean by uploads? Okay, so I'm going to actually keep going, and then I'll come back to the questions towards the end as well. There are subscribe options. So here you can actually subscribe for grant opportunities. So let's say you don't want to always come to grants.ca.gov because you don't know what you're going to find or what you may not find. So you can actually subscribe to our notifications. And here you can subscribe to daily or weekly, whatever fits best for you. And then you can pick if you want to see all new grants or you want to see some of the different categories. So in this case, you can, pick a category that you're interested in, or you can say all new grants. I just want to see everything, and then I'll narrow it down myself. So you could do that. That subscription is very helpful, in a way that you don't have to come to the portal all the time. You could just get the email. The other resource we have right now, we keep updating the website. So there's a lot of times we take the feedback in and we'll enhance certain things. So you want to be able to be on top of that. So we always have blog posts or things like that. We currently are having a grant seeker feedback session on October 15th. So we have information about that here. You can RSVP. So this is kind of our news blog area about this portal. You can contact us. We are open for feedback. So as you go through the portal, as you experience a little bit more looking for things, if there's some feedback that you have for us, we're totally open for any feedback. We're always looking to improve the site. Again, just like Robert said, this is still kind of being worked on. So as we move forward, we want to make sure we can capture your needs and prioritize those. And so here's the form that you can fill out to give us a feedback, or you can email us here and provide us feedback that way too. We have other resources here. You can see the overview of the site. This is the historical way of knowing how we got here. And then we also have a statistics dashboard, and it does take a little bit time to load to show you all the statistics that we're currently publicizing, because it's pulling data live. So you'll have to refresh sometimes a couple of times to see all of it. Or you can actually pull it up in Google Sheets, and you don't have to log in, and it'll show you the data that is being captured there. So we have grant opportunities by category, you can see total grant and funding availability, which is also on the homepage. Or you can see how many applicant eligibility by the applicant type. So we right now have 31.7% public agency related grant opportunities in the portal. And it's also pulling up the top 10 departments and how many grants they have. So it gives you a little bit of an overview on, the statistical analysis of the portal. We're looking to enhance this as well in the future. So and adding more data points for people to see. So that is also available for you. There is a area for the state agencies where they'll have to log in and they can upload or do their online form and so forth. So that's kind of the area for the state agencies to utilize. And again, frequently asked questions and so forth is all available here as well for everyone. Okay, that's it. All I had. I'm gonna actually move back to chat and see if you guys have any questions.
Thank you, Giovanni. And
Yeah.
Just going back to the question about the place for uploads, the person who asked that question, feel free to unmute your mic. And if you want to explain it, with your voice, if that's easier, please feel free to do so at this time.
So it looks like, based on what I'm seeing, is I know we can attach links, but upload PDF documents. So currently the portal does not allow you to upload any PDF documents. So the departments are actually, because you have to still go to the grant makers site. So you still have to go to the agency site to apply. So that's why there's links available for people to actually go through and read the RFP. This is not grants.gov where you can actually apply for the grant on the portal. We're not there yet. But for time being, you still have to go through the department's website is the reason why there's only links available there. One person asked if I can review an application. Oh, that was for, I think, Pauline. I think that's all I had. Any other questions anyone else has? Any thoughts so far?
Well, thank you, Giovanni, so much for your
Yeah.
presentation and for the overview of the grants.ca.gov. I think everyone here has. I can add your email to the chat maybe if they have any questions, and I think everyone here knows you're always welcome to email myself. I can add mine as well. My name's Robert with HUD San Francisco office, and then Pauline as well. Any questions you have for her, feel free to reach out. In terms of scheduling for next week, we're hoping to be back on Adobe Connect if our host is able to do so. And this will be a shorter, more office hours type version of this training where you can kind of just ask Pauline any and all questions you have regarding grant writing. Maybe some, as Pauline mentioned, she can't review any kind of applications or edit that you've done, but if there's certain specific questions on there, she might be able to help, or you can find out. So I think we can give everyone a bit of their day back. You'll be receiving as well a link for a evaluation for this training on the typical Adobe Connect. So we would ask, and we'd greatly appreciate you filling that out, just so we can get some good feedback for future trainings. And we thank everyone for their participation and attendance, and we'll hopefully see you all next week. Thank you so much.